This looks like we're up. Dr. Ed Slover, welcome to the podcast. You are in a place to be. Thanks for being here. How you doing tonight?
I'm well, Chris. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, yes, sir. I read a little bit about your background. Before we just started recording here, you said you were in the health and fitness industry, and then you seem to be wanting to help people become better, I guess is a better way to put it. Why don't you give a brief rundown of who you are? That way the audience kind of knows what we're getting into and just the gist of who you are. And that way, then we'll take it from there. How about that?
It sounds great. When I went to college, had every intention on becoming a sportscaster. This was when ESPN was in its heyday. And I graduated from college, had an opportunity to go to a sports camp. And on the way home from that, realized that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, because I didn't want to work 80 hours a week for $18,000 a year getting people coffee.
Mm-hmm.
I copped out and went to grad school. And then after about a year and a half of that, was completely fried, and then went up to the owner of the gym that I was working out at and asked him for a job. And that started a 16-year career in the commercial health and fitness industry, most notably as the district manager for 24-Hour Fitness here in Phoenix. And subsequent to that, I had an opportunity to get into higher education. I've been an assistant professor of management and marketing at Grand Canyon University for the last 8 years. And 18 months ago, I started Quest Consulting, so a business and management consulting business. And then along the way, I started the Quest for Life podcast, and then formed the Quest for Life as its own separate business. And that has been unbelievably rewarding. I saw this image on Instagram a few months ago, and it was a screenshot of a woman who tweeted that said, "Why is it that when women need therapy, they go to a psychologist, and when men need therapy, they start a podcast?" And it's so true. I've grown so much over the last now 13 months, writing and recording and producing. And I mean, you know the drill.
Oh yeah. Been there.
And meeting so many wonderful people. And my first 2 seasons, I didn't really have a particular theme outside of really wanting to help improve people's lives. This particular season, and I actually just recorded my 7th episode earlier today, is all about helping people level up their mindset so they can achieve peak performance in life and in business. And it's been an absolute blast.
Yeah. So kind of moving on from that. So I was reading that you always had this growth kind of mindset after your father passed. I guess it's kind of going back a little bit. So we can start a little bit right there. And so before all that, were you just kind of going day by day and just living your life? And then all of a sudden, with this life kind of experience happening when your father passed, is that when you decided that, hey, I want to do better. I want to be better. This is where my journey starts.
Not quite. So I had a pretty nondescript childhood up until I turned 13. My father passed away of pancreatic cancer when he was 39. And I had 2 older sisters. And as you might expect, that was quite traumatic. Now, they ended up moving out over the next couple of years. Then it was just my mom and I. So in a span of about 18 months to 2 years, we went from a family of 5 to really a family of 2. And it was a time when my mom needed to get out and live her life again.
Yeah.
And the reality is, I didn't know how to cope. Fortunately, I never got in trouble, even though I was a latchkey kid. Who knows what was protecting me from that? Maybe I was just afraid of getting in trouble. But I was an angry young man. I was an angry young man. And it wasn't until my early 20s where I had alienated one of my sisters to the point where I asked her, "Why don't we have a relationship anymore?" And her response was quite blunt: "Because you're a jerk."
Wow.
And, Chris, we need people in our lives to pull things out of our blind spot.
Sure.
And that happened to be one of those moments where I needed that pulled out of my blind spot. And from that day forward, so really in my early 20s, everything really became about trying to live out whatever potential that I have available in me. Really pursued the academics, undergrad, master's, doctorate, have had just wonderful career success. And now at my age, I'm I'll be 49 this year. And there's this interesting space in midlife where you realize that it's no more about the material acquisition or status or money. I've constructed that life, and there's this deconstruction that's occurring in preparation for this reconstruction where it's really about legacy and giving back and being of service to others.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird how and I don't know if it's, the narrative or it's the media or entertainment, whatever you want to say, is, growing up that you think that, having this materialistic possessions that you're automatically successful in life. And
Right.
that's what, people will, and which people do, automatically judge you for, based on what car you drive, your profession, what type of house you live in, where'd you grow up at, where'd you go to school at, and all that good stuff. But like you just said, that it seems like, being, when you said you're 49 years old and you started to become that, hey, it's not really all about that, and that, chasing these, what do you call it? Chasing these valuables just to impress people who don't really care about you. Is just, why am I doing this? Because, that was one of my ways of thinking when I was younger, that, I had to have the best of everything in order to get, I guess, the respect out of the world, and
Yeah.
just that it's like, what am I then? I don't know what happened, but finally just deemed on me one day, just maybe it was after college and stuff, that I was chasing something that I didn't want, or I thought that I only wanted just because people told me that's what I had to have, or that's what they told me I wanted. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just that once I kind of changed that little bit of the mindset and was just like started looking about what does Chris really want out of this life and stuff. It's just like, man, where am I going? Am I really happy? Is this really what I had planned out for here? And not that, I guess that's almost everybody's life, but everyone, it's just life in general. Just there's no manual, right? And you just go
That's
down
right.
different paths and you hope it's the best path that you choose. And if not, the hands you get dealt with, as far as in a poker analogy, that you just do the best you can with, I guess.
Yeah, in terms of human development, we all live in a similar way in the sense that up until about the age of 8, so this is commonly accepted by psychological research, up until about the age of 8, we spend a disproportionate amount of our time, and rightfully so, seeking the validation of the adults in our life, namely our parents. We need to learn what good looks like. I mean, in fact, most kids between the ages of 3 and 6 or 7 don't know the difference between truth and lies. It's the adults that teach them that.
Sure.
And right around the age of 8, there's a shift starts to happen where there's a decline in the pursuit of external validation from our parents and more of a pursuit in external validation from our social circle. And all of this makes sense because we have to live in cooperation with others. If for no other reason, we don't get anything done if we can't cooperate with them. But it gets really strange on us when we get into early adulthood, or heck, even into midlife, where we're constantly pursuing or feeling as though we need the validation of others,
Yeah.
where we're living by other people's standards, whether it's individuals or society. What we have to at least admit to ourselves is that the goalpost is always moving. When we live by other people's expectations or others' standards, the goalpost will always move. I mean, what is ultimately good enough? How many cars do I need? How many pairs of vintage Nike shoes do I need to still be one of the cool kids or whatever? To live a functional life, though, there has to be this transition in focusing less on needing external validation, which feels good when we get it, and it should. It's supposed to. There's a neurochemical cocktail that gets released. But moving away from that towards doing things well for the sake of doing them well, being involved in activities because they bring us joy. And by virtue of that, we show up differently in the world, and we show up better for the people that we let into our world. And it has a ripple effect to that, rather than being just wrecked if we don't get the latest like on social media, or someone doesn't give us praise for the work we did at our job or whatever. So in summary, really, is when we put our self-worth in other people's hands, it's a recipe for disaster. It's virtually impossible to find joy and happiness in that space.
Is that the problem with the world today? Is that so many people put their self-worth into other people's hands just because of we're in the information age, and where anything you do will be, you know, spread across the world in a matter of minutes, seconds, I guess that's to say. And that, and you're going through social media all day, and you're always hearing about what other people are doing, good or bad. And, either who's got the latest things or whatever. And so you're always consumed with, so much information coming at you, and almost comparing yourself to others at all times throughout the day, rather than just not know, only being familiarized with what's going on in your local community, that, and just kind of focusing on more yourself. But now it seems like the world has just become right here at your fingertips or in the palm of your hand, where you can immediately just find out anything in a matter of, like I said, seconds. And all of a sudden your brain just can't handle it. Maybe is what I'm trying to say. And that, and that's what we decide, that, oh, okay, if we put ourselves out there and we get, like you just said, like, 48 likes on Instagram, and all of a sudden, oh, people love me, okay, now I got to get to, 96 likes, people will love me even more. And we start chasing that dope, with that dopamine hit or that serotonin.
Right.
And like, I guess that's, maybe I'm rambling on too much, but that's just, is that the issue with the modern world? Cause sometimes I wonder if it's an issue with, men of my age and, my stature, and just even got people that younger than me, just that if we get too consumed with this stuff, and it's just kind of, what's beating the path of how the brain is developed over certain.
Yeah. To answer your question, it's certainly one of the problems. I think technology is an easy scapegoat.
Sure.
Our lives are full of distraction, independent of the technology. The technology just is front and center. The average American spends 3.5 hours on their smartphone every day. I spend 2.5, so that means you would spend 4.5 just to average that out. But we're in an older generational cohort. That generational cohort that's older than us spends less than we do.
Mm.
So the younger millennials and Generation Z, they're on their phone 6 to 7 hours a day. And I'm not so sure if it's not just kind of baked into the cake with this. You referenced dopamine. We have an incentive reward system that whenever we see a like, and of course, the algorithms are incredibly brilliant at keeping our attention and focus. And so this becomes a neurochemical groove that gets cut and over time deepens and widens. And it's addictive.
Yeah.
Just like validation from other people is addictive, whether other substances, alcohol, drugs, different behaviors like gambling, all of these become addictions. And the way to overcome it is to cut different grooves. Once that chemical groove is cut, it's cut. You're not gonna turn that off completely. So when it comes to something like technology, one of my recommendations is, if you're on your phone 4 hours a day, let's start by cutting it back to 3.5.
Yeah.
And figuring out how we can cut a different groove in that other 30 minutes with something that adds more productive value.
Mm. Yeah, it makes sense. They kind of start small, just rather than just trying to quit cold turkey, I guess, so to speak, because it's not impossible, but it's harder for somebody to do it rather than that, where they can just get accumulated with just, all right, I could do something else for 30 more minutes. Maybe I can read a book, or, go on a walk, or whatever it is. And, and figure it out that way. But, and then you also can transfer that to other things in life that, might be non-habitual to you, that you are taking down a negative spiral feedback loop, whatever you want to say, rather than a positive one. And you keep wondering why I never have time to do X, Y, and Z. It's because, well, maybe I was spent, 4 hours on my phone, but then I spent the other 3 on Netflix or whatever. And so then, you start to point at fingers or whatever. Oh, it's not me. It's, technology. It's all their fault. It's really not me though. But it's like, well, if you really sit back and look at what you're doing, if you have goals and things in your life, you're really not doing, I don't think part of your goals is to watch 3 hours of Netflix. And I'm not putting down Netflix or anything, but like, again, just kind of talking about the modern world and everything, it's just so easy to go home and just sit on your couch and just say, screw everything else. I'm just going to do this for tonight. This is my reward system. I had such a stressful day, rather than just trying to change your mindset, change the way you think about life, and change the way that, like I said, if you do have these 5-year goals, 10-year goals of making 6-figure salaries, or becoming whatever it is you want to be, that you want in this life, that you can. And it's really not hard. I know it's not easy, but it's really not as hard today in this modern world as it was back then, where you have again, like that's one of the pros is, you're right here with the ease of access of so much information at your fingertips to learn
Yeah.
anything that you want to learn.
Yeah, I think all this falls in the bucket of simple but not easy.
Yes.
Now, one of the first questions I ask a prospective client is about how they orient to the world. If they orient where they believe that they have control and agency in their life, where they can bring about or realize their own fate and destiny, and then they take responsibility for the consequences of their decision, then I'll work with them.
Sure.
Because the opposite is it's a constant push rather than trying to reel someone in where they externalize everything isn't their responsibility, the world happens to them. And interestingly, once the blame card comes out, the victim card comes out right away.
Of course.
And that, so working with people that say, hey, look, I don't have enough time. All right. Well, are you willing to do an exercise where we break this down? We all get 168 hours every week. We all spend the majority of our time sleeping. Next is work, and then different obligations that we have. And what we're looking for are time bandits. Spending 3 hours on social media now, that where you're not monetizing a business, right? You're just watching TikTok and mindlessly scrolling. Well, we also have to account for rest, and rest has productive value, but does it have 3 hours of productive value watching videos on TikTok? I'm not so sure. And knowing that most people can't stop cold turkey, very, very small percentage of the population can stop any habit like that or break any habit like that cold turkey.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a matter of scaling it back 30 minutes or an hour a day, and then reinvesting that hour into something that we claim we want, whether it's that 5-year or 10-year goal you referenced.
Yeah. Do people know what they want? Do you think? I mean, like, we were talking about earlier, you thought you wanted to be a sportscaster. And I was one of those, going through college and my bachelor's and master's. I thought I wanted to work in sports as well. And it got to where, I did a couple internships, and it got to like knowing like, oh, you really got to know other people in order to, get to certain positions. Is kind of what my advisors kind of told me, and some, my internship bosses, like a lot of it was who in the sports industry.
Right.
And then working, X amount of hours, more than 40 hours a week, plus getting, not great pay or whatever, but you're paying your dues, I guess somebody would say. But it's like, do I really want to do this? And then I found something more that I thought attracted to my mind and my goals and values and what I thought I wanted in life, compared to, because I went through all of college, all my master's degrees thinking in sports. I was working in sports. I want to be an athletic director one day. This is it. And I found out like, oh, this is not it. But is that it? I mean, do a lot of people not really know what they want in life, or they still try to figure it out?
Well, having the opportunity to work with Generation Z every day, they really don't know yet. They, of course, given where they are in their arc of their life, they're still living by the expectations of their parents or past teachers or coaches. And I don't know about you, Chris, but one of the things that I found is that my 20s were about really being able to articulate what I didn't like and what I didn't want, which, interestingly, the opposite of those things weren't necessarily what I liked and what I wanted. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s, and I think maybe the birth of my daughter and the timing of all of it, where it became much more comfortable in my own skin, where I was finally able to articulate definitively what I liked and what I wanted. Those things that I knew would bring me joy, and those were the things that I sprinted after once I was able to define those things. So I think it's just part of our development in the evolution of life, and how our personality gets expressed, what we're exposed to, who walks in and out of our world. I think it's just such a diverse combination of factors that I think when we're younger, whenever we say we want something, we're making a claim that we're not 100% sure is true, which makes sense in that, when we pursue those things, we don't get very far down that road to be like, oh yeah, you're into CrossFit and you've seen plenty of people that come in and They're like, yes, I want to change my life. My doctor told me I'm going to die if I don't do something soon. And 6 weeks later, they fall out.
Yeah.
Well, maybe one of the maybe one of the considerations is not living a life of going guardrail to guardrail, where they're living a lifestyle, nutrition or exercise wise, that obviously isn't conducive to sustainable health. And now all of a sudden they're going all the other way, where they're committing to working out 5, 6, 7 days a week. They just completely overhaul their nutrition, and that's for most people, that's not sustainable.
No.
And one of the things I developed really early on that's served me extraordinarily well is this idea of non-disruptive changes. Can we pull a few levers with an understanding of how the brain works? Can we pull a few levers to start gaining momentum where they're not these sweeping changes, where also people start getting results, and then you have this positive feedback loop that forms, and they're like, oh my gosh, I feel better. My clothes are looser. I'm sleeping better. This whole cascading effect, where then all of a sudden, because they're gaining momentum, they want to continue that momentum.
Yeah, like gaining small little wins, when you
That's
start
right.
to work out and you start to kind of notice that, oh, my pants fit a little bit better today, or I wake up and I don't have brain fog, or I actually feel like I can walk, to the other end of the parking lot and not be out of breath. So you start to, understand like, hey, what I'm doing is working, right? And you
That's
start
right.
to get those wins, and you build off of it. Kind of is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. The leadership guru, if you will, John Maxwell, talks about momentum with regard to business, and the same holds true for us in life, particularly related to achieving a fitness goal. Imagine a locomotive that is stationary, and you put a little 1-inch triangle in front of the drive shaft. You
Mhm.
can't get that. You can't get that thing moving. But all of a sudden, if we can build momentum and you have a locomotive going 55 miles an hour, it would actually pulverize a 5-foot cinder block wall if it struck it. Momentum solves so many of our problems, provided that we can simply get started. Well, okay. Well, as someone who is sitting on the couch, not treating their mental, physical, or spiritual, or even emotional health well, what about getting going a little bit, and them seeing the benefit of these small changes that don't disrupt their life?
Mm.
For example, I had a coworker, I guess, gosh, it's probably been 8 or 9 years ago by now. She was 51 years old and she wanted to lose 50 pounds. And she knew I was in the health and fitness industry. And she asked if I could help her. And the first thing I told her was yes, but my philosophy is all about non-disruptive changes. At the time, she and her husband were the de facto band managers of one of her daughter's musical groups. So they ate out 6 nights a week.
Oh, wow.
And I said, okay, you're going to still do that, but I'm going to teach you how to be able to do that more effectively. And the first thing we have to talk about is how the brain works. We have an almond-sized gland in our brain called the hypothalamus. Among other things, it regulates appetite. And if you envision the hypothalamus much like a stoplight, and each one of those lamps represents one of the macronutrients: proteins, carbs, fats.
Right.
At every meal, what we want to do is we want to make sure we light those lamps. Because if we don't, and eating a donut for breakfast and that's it is the perfect example of this, where we get the fat from the oil in the donut and certainly the carbohydrate from the sugar in the donut, but it has next to no protein. And an hour and a half later, we're eating again.
Mm-hmm.
But what if we're able to light the lamp every single time we eat? And so she and her husband were getting ready to go to dinner that night. And I asked her what she normally got. She normally would order a turkey burger, fries, and wine.
Okay.
Like, okay, so here's what I'd like you to do. We know that roughly 20 minutes after we start eating, the signal gets sent between our brain and our digestive system to stop eating. And Thanksgiving dinner is a really good example of that.
Oh, yes.
What I wanted her to do was just to glance at her watch when the server brought dinner. She cut the turkey burger in half at my instruction and counted a dozen fries, because one of her challenges was on previous diets was she didn't feel like she could participate. And then, enjoy the wine. Well, in terms of lighting the lamp, you get the carbohydrate from the fries and the bun. You get the protein from the turkey and some fat from the turkey and some fat from the cheese that went on the turkey burger.
Yes.
And after 20 minutes, if she felt hungry, drink 8 ounces of water. If at 10 minutes after that, she was legitimately hungry, eat the other half of the burger. Otherwise, I just saved you $6 for lunch tomorrow.
Nice.
Chris, the next day, she pops her head in my office and holds up a grocery bag with the other half of the turkey burger.
Lunch. Nice.
She ended up joining a gym 5 months into her journey. I left a month after that and to take the position at Grand Canyon University, and she had lost 46 pounds.
Wow.
And I saw her a couple of years ago. So keeping in mind, she was 51 at the time. She'll be approaching 60 this year. And we met for lunch and she had kept all of it off. And I asked her, I'm like, how did you do it? She's like, I just kept doing what we talked about. She's like, it's so easy and I don't have to think about it.
Yes. Yeah. See, these little things like that, just, it can make a world of difference where people just think I have to eat a salad. I know we don't have to be this be a health and fitness podcast right here or episode, but yeah, just one thinks, oh, I got to eat like a salad all the time. And that's why I want to lose weight, and I shouldn't have wine or all that stuff, what you're saying, but just like little changes like that, just like, getting your meal and cutting it in half and just saving it for your lunch tomorrow. That is a greatly undermined way to do things. And I don't know why people just don't look at it like that as far as like portions and everything. And maybe it's just because they don't really understand what a portion is of like protein, carbs, and fats, right? Just that, they kind of see every day. Like America seems to pride itself on how much you can eat with like all the food challenges and, the hot dog contest they have at the 4th of July and everything. And it's just that people, in my opinion, don't seem to understand that, okay, you don't really need that whole burger right there, which I'm not dismissing burgers, but our whole burger or whole whatever it is, just because it's, that's like twice or 3 times as what you need. Portion control seems to be the main thing, in my opinion, one of the problems with this country. And that's one thing I had to learn across my, little fitness journey here, was that I thought, when I first did my thing, I've talked about this before, but when I first did one of my diets, it said I could only have like 4 ounces of chicken or whatever. And I put normally what I would on a plate, and that I weighed it. And I was like, oh, wait,
right.
That's like 15, 16 ounces. Like I thought that was like nothing. And so then it's like, now when you actually saw what 4 ounces of chicken was, oh, damn. Okay. Well, this is how it's going to be. And just getting that visualization in my head. And I guess like you were talking about switching those levers in the brain, I was like, okay, now we know. Now we know. Now we can move forward, and now we can start to see these results, hopefully, and go from there. And,
Chris, in many ways, the deck's stacked against us. Now, what I'm not saying, and I want to preface this, what I'm not saying is that it's not our responsibility.
Yeah,
it is. When it all comes out, it's our responsibility. However, the deck is stacked against us. Government food subsidies make certain food products extraordinarily inexpensive by comparison. Animal agriculture is one example. Now, I'm not talking about the inflationary period that we've all dealt with the last however long, 2 years, but comparatively inexpensive. And then you bring in food scientists who have perfected creating food stuff. These are the things in boxes and bags that tap into the 3 things that the human organism is naturally addicted to, which is salt, fat, and sugar.
mm-hmm.
And then they market it with these really colorful boxes and some extraordinary claims that a cookie should get the American Heart Association seal of approval, and you never see that same sticker on an apple. And so basically what I'm getting at is eating healthy isn't the default setting for us.
Mm-hmm.
The default setting for us are consuming those things that allow the pleasure center of our brain to fire. So take that donut I referenced earlier. Well, not only were you dealing with blood sugar considerations, you're also dealing with dopamine considerations. And you have a donut, dopamine elevates for about 15 minutes. That's not unlike getting validated on social media. And as that, if you imagine a seesaw, as that declines, it doesn't come back to level. It actually overcorrects. And it's almost as if the brain is feeling pain. That's not the best way of saying that, because the brain doesn't feel pain, but it's almost a dopamine deficit. And the thing that gets that back is to consume more of the refined processed foods. So I don't know about you, but when I grew up, going into a grocery store, I thought, well, this is what the food available to me. This must be what's healthy to consume.
Yeah.
And 80% of it is exactly what we shouldn't consume.
Exactly. Yeah, I had no idea of what nutrition was growing up. Just that, you eat just to eat. If you're hungry, eat whatever it is. It didn't matter. And I didn't know anything about proteins, carbs, and fats. I just knew, and not to say anything bad towards my parents either. I heard this quote one time from a guy I follow in the CrossFit stuff. He said that if you were fat when you were under 16 years old, it's your parents' fault. Right. And I was like, well, I guess it could be. I mean, I'm not going to completely I don't know if that's 100% true, but it does make sense in certain aspects. But, I was never a fat kid or anything. I don't know if it was just one of those things. I just got lucky in life. But to your point, though, yeah, when I would walk into a grocery store, it's just, everything here is fine to eat. No matter what, you didn't have to worry about, if you eat too many, I remember hearing when I was little, if you eat too many grapes, you get cancer. Right. I don't know if that's true. I don't know where that came from, but I know somebody told me that when I was young. And I remember, and I don't know if they were just messing with me or what. It's kind of like what we were talking about earlier in the podcast about truths and lies or whatever. But it was just like, well, maybe they just want me to stop eating grapes. I don't know. But anyway, it was just things like that I would just pick up from random people in my family or friends about their experiences with certain foods. Just like if somebody was like, growing up, nobody knew the word gluten. I don't even know if gluten was even around then. But if somebody were to say like, oh, I stopped eating gluten and I lost 40-some pounds, and then everybody went, oh yeah, you should stop eating gluten. That's the thing. That's the way to do it. To do that. That's how my education came from as far as nutrition stuff growing up. And I didn't know as far as performance, how, what you ate was, kind of like putting gas into a car. What you actually put into your body is how your body's going to perform on
That's right.
the sports world and stuff like that. And, it always came from, even too, part of my family were in the area of where sports figures were drinking beer during halftime or whatever, smoking cigarettes, and that's just part of what they did. And
that's right.
Nobody knew anything about the science behind strength conditioning and nutrition. It was just, I guess you're just either born or you were blessed with the skills that you had. You maybe did a little bit of weightlifting, and that was it. So I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that point, but that was my point. But changing gears here a little bit, going back on you, I didn't want to make this whole about nutrition and strength conditioning.
I love the topic.
I'm a sucker for it too.
Yeah.
Big time. But just kind of going back with you though, just so everyone kind of gets more of who you are and everything, that we didn't touch much on it in the beginning, but you've done like I think you had a lot of six-figure, jobs, I guess I could say, salaries, and that, and then you did the higher education thing, and now you even got the book called Quest, right?
Yeah.
Like, where did the motivation become to write the book? Is that just from kind of what we've been talking about, as far as your journey through life, these leadership roles, your your academics, or what? Where was that? Your podcast? You just decided to write? What's up?
Yeah, let me give you the Cliff Notes version on that.
Okay.
I'm a person of deep faith, and not in a Bible thumping type of way, in my own personal relationship. And for the last 15 years or so, anytime I felt a pull, I followed it. And it's led me down paths that have led to nothing but wonderful outcomes. And being in higher education, it's really easy to become insulated in that environment. And I had thought over the years that maybe I would start a consulting business, if for no other reason to stay relevant to my students, given how quickly business and industry change. But nothing ever came of it. And then in late August of 2021, I walked into the living room and I told my wife, I'm like, I'm feeling a pull. And she gets excited about that. And it was about starting Quest Consulting. And the first thing that I did was make phone calls to gather information from people that I trusted. And I ended up speaking with two gentlemen, both of whom were consultants, one of which was my doctoral dissertation committee chair. And they could not have had more different philosophical approaches to consulting, but they had one thing that they said that was in common. And they're like, Ed, you need to write a book. If for no other reason, it's a pretty impressive business card, but you need to write a book, personal philosophy, business philosophy, and go do that first. And so I outlined the book. I started writing September 27th of 21 and published it November 3rd. It was 83,000 words in 83 hours.
Wow.
Quite literally, it flowed. I actually told my wife on a number of occasions, it feels like I'm talking out at the end of my fingers. Now, it's not an academic book. I intentionally made it conversational.
Sure.
But it was a wonderful accomplishment. I had never thought I would ever have time to be able to do that. But, I was able to weave in 1 to 3 hours a day to sit down and write, sometimes more, and it just flowed. Subsequent to publishing the book, I was walking out to the parking garage after class one day, and I had a student that inquired about a podcast and if I'd ever thought about doing one. And over the years, there had been a half dozen students that were curious about why I didn't have one.
Yeah.
And he says to me, if you published a podcast, I'd listen every week. I'm like, wow. Okay, well, let's see where this adventure goes. I mean, who knows? I mean, how long have you been doing podcasting?
It's a little over 2 years now.
Right. So it hasn't been that long where you remember, like, okay, how do I figure this out? I mean, I started in my bedroom closet next to my wife's sweaters.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm still in the same area where I started at, this third bedroom that I just kind of makeshifted into you see my dogs behind me.
I see your dogs. Yeah.
Just like I built a desk and got a second monitor and got some microphones. I was like, hey, I'm a podcaster now.
You're right? A podcaster.
Yeah, I'm going to try this out. We'll see what happens.
And in terms of the consulting business, I intentionally didn't take on any clients in the fall of 21. I was writing a book, designing website, really building out my vision for this. And I ended up getting my first client the third week of January last year, and ended up having 22 clients last year alone. Now, I didn't have anything to compare it to. I didn't know what good looked like as far as that goes. But the people that I spoke with along the way were blown away by that number. And these were clients ranging from folks that were just starting from scratch. They didn't even know how to file for an LLC, up to working with a nonprofit in Georgia, helping them basically blow up their entire volunteer program and recreating it, to doing leadership, curriculum development and training for a healthcare company here in Arizona. So this incredibly diverse work that has been overwhelmingly rewarding. I feel extraordinarily blessed. And in addition to my teaching, wonderful family. Talk about being at a place in life where the only word I have for it is gratitude.
For sure. For sure. Having that gratitude and just having that, I guess just knowing that if and when a student came up to me, or not if and when, but if a student came up to me and was like, hey, if you had a podcast, I would listen to it every week or every show or whatever. And just knowing that you're making that a difference in a student's lives, is that just very, very fulfilling? Just knowing that, hey, this is all coming together. This is all meant, like you said, I know you said you were not a Bible thumping person, but just, hey, maybe I found my reasoning on here. Now I'm giving it back to everybody. It's just having a feeling like that, just knowing that you've helped somebody, and even in small ways or big ways or whatever it is, it's just got to be so fulfilling, correct? Just knowing that you're making that impact.
No doubt. It was such an amazing compliment. I mean, the reality is we never truly know how we come off to other people.
Exactly.
Unless they tell us.
Exactly.
We never know definitively. And to have that conversation and then that compliment, it's reaffirming. And if we tie back to what we spoke about earlier in terms of being validated by other people, I didn't seek that validation. No. I didn't know what he was going to say next. And yet he offered something that validated or reaffirmed me or what I'm about or how I go about doing things. And it felt really good because it's supposed to feel really good. Had he not said that, I wouldn't have known anything else, and it wouldn't have wrecked me for him not having said it.
Sure.
But it served as the final impetus to start something that I had no idea where it could possibly go, and quite frankly, still don't. All I know is that I've been made better for having taken that first step on that journey, that specifically with podcasting, but obviously, consulting and coaching. I'm showing up better in the world, which allows me to be better for the people that come into my world.
That's great. And
Yep.
going back a little bit, I know you just like you just said you weren't like a Bible thumping person, but being in higher education and dealing with woke culture and just politically correctness. I mean, do you find it tough talking about religion or spirituality, or is it just kind of depend? Do you just kind of know the room and to say what I should be saying and what I should not be saying, and what like, hey, does this relate to this topic X, Y, and Z? Or I mean, does it ever make you uncomfortable? Maybe that's just what I'm trying to say.
It doesn't, and here's why. Grand Canyon University is the largest Christian university in the country.
Did not know that.
Yeah. In terms of total enrollment, the university passed Liberty a couple of years ago, and that's how schools measure their size in terms of total enrollments between in person and online.
Right. Yeah, Liberty's right next to me, and I guess I always thought they were the biggest because they used to pride themselves on being the biggest.
That's right.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah. So my teaching style, though, is I don't bring it up a lot. The reason I don't is 99% of the students are going to work for secular businesses. So they need to be bartenders metaphorically. And bartenders are taught there are three things you don't talk about with your patrons. You don't talk about sex, religion, or politics,
Sure.
Especially while that person's getting drunk on the other side of the bar. And I'm candid about that with them. As it relates to woke culture, certain topics get brought up.
Yes.
And it's an interesting interplay to how do you create a discussion? And this is a question that I constantly am asking and answering myself. How do you create a discussion where you're dealing with a controversial topic that you want to hear from both sides without it completely devolving into a shouting match?
Agreed.
And my role in that is Switzerland, where I'm able to see the merit. Whether I agree with one side or the other is not the point. I try to identify with the merit of the points of the argument and present that, and while simultaneously trying to downplay some of the emotion and those things that rev people up. And we end up having some really robust discussions with all grounded in this premise that I don't have to like what you're saying. I don't have to like your worldview or like what you value, but I'm going to show you respect and dignity,
of course,
in the moment. Now, once the moment's over, and if you're still upset about that, I'll let you go be upset about that, right? Because those are your emotions. I'm not going to take any ownership of that.
Yeah.
But it's this interesting psychological space where you cannot like something and yet still respect it.
Of course.
And I don't know about you, Chris, but when I made that realization, it was somewhere in my early to mid 20s. I felt like I was finally growing up.
Oh, yes. See, I never going through my mid 20s. I'm 36 now, but going through college and hanging out with friends and things like that. Having conversations where they could be considered hot button topics. I never really experienced any of those just because my friend group didn't do that. We didn't have debates on drug legalization or not marijuana or abortion or whatever. We just didn't do that. I don't know if it's just because it wasn't cool or we just weren't smart enough. I don't know what it was, but we just didn't do that. But it wasn't until I guess maybe 5 to 10 years ago is when I actually started thinking that, wondering like, what did I think about certain aspects like that? Because it seems like here lately, every time you watch the news or go on the internet, there's always some sort of new world event happening, right? And I'm like, okay, well, if somebody were to ask me this, like, I just don't want to say, I don't know. I'd rather have something better to say than just, well, I saw it on the news, so this is the way it must be, rather than just trying to come up and form my own thoughts. And even started my own podcast where, yeah, I've had a couple of topics on here that were hot button topics, but I've always just tried to stay neutral and try to, I'm like you, read both sides of the argument, just because I don't know everything. I don't know what I don't know. And that, if I can hear why Ed might think one way or the other, but like, okay, let me see what he's got to say. Maybe he knows something I don't know. And then let me hear the other side of the argument, or I'll go do my own research on it. But yeah, nothing comes from a huge shouting match and
Right.
trying to shout over one another and just be the loudest and trying to dominate the conversation that way. It's like, well, you're not winning just because you're yelling now. I mean, even though you're yelling and what you're saying, it still has no, merit to what the conversation originally was.
That's right.
Yeah. And that's where I just like kind of just knew that it's kind of, I looked at it like this, when you really start to learn some new skill, right? Like whether it be snowboarding or just anything in general, but most people I feel like really want to learn it really fast and do it as fast as they can just because you're excited, you think that it's going to be easy for you. But if you slow things down is when you really start to learn like how to do X, Y, and Z. You're with a professional and you might be the ego, might be whatever. And you're speeding through it. You're not really learning the foundational skills that you need, but you're just because you want to do it so quick. But then you
Yeah.
slow it down a little bit and you start to learn. And I think for me, that's when slowing things down and not just speaking because it was my turn to speak or speaking because I had to. It's just like, hey, I don't have to say anything here. I can be one of these people who just, it's like, hey, I'll go research it later, and then I'll come back to the conversation. So
Yeah.
yeah, and that seemed to make a world of difference for me rather than just, trying to be somebody I'm not. Hey, if I don't know anything about, the Chinese balloon, then I don't know anything about it.
Right.
I don't mind saying it.
Yeah.
And that's what
And
we're
when it comes to certain social issues and that devolve into shouting matches, it's like, what do we win if we're right?
yeah.
And how would we know? All we're doing is increasing the divisiveness or division that we claim we don't want in the first place. And what's also fascinating about different worldviews is many people hold the idea that if I actually entertain your worldview, then on some level I have to advocate for it or adopt it into my worldview. And that's exactly not what has to happen. I don't have to. I don't have to agree with it to
Yeah.
be able to sit there, despite the fact that listening to it probably it makes me a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But what's wrong with having a little bit of discomfort? Because it's, as you know, it's in the discomfort that all of us grow. It's in the discomfort that we learn.
Yes, of course.
But yet people don't tolerate that dissonance that, that because they're like, well, if I have this attitude about it and if my behavior is inconsistent with that attitude, that doesn't feel good. And not coincidentally, because it breaks down into shouting matches, that really in many ways points to a lack of knowledge or an increased level of ignorance because we don't know what the other person is saying. And because we feel that we're not being heard and vice versa, then all we're doing is engaging in a waste of time.
Yes. I agree 100%. Wasting your breath. And I've been on the end of that where, obviously CrossFit is not for everybody, but
Sure.
and I'm a big advocate for it. It's changed my life. It's changed me not only physically, but mentally. And, it's been one of the best things I've ever done in my life. But there's people out there who will only go when they start to talk about CrossFit, just even with colleagues and friends or whatever, they don't always know all the facts and figures. And I'm not one of those people who do either, but they're going off what they've either read on Twitter, random, mom and pop websites, and just, hearsay, not rather than just experiencing it for themselves or actually reading, going on, what is it, pubmed.edu or pubmed.com, I can't remember, or actually reading actual studies of what certain things do. and I'm not saying you can't get hurt in it. I'm not saying anything like that, but it's just like, when you start just spitting out ideas in some form, it's just like, well, you know what? I think that's just your opinion. That's not really a stat or a figure. Oh, did I lose you? Oh, you back? Nope. He's still. Oh, back. Okay, good. I thought I lost you for a second. But yeah, so I guess real quick though, it's just one of those things that where you're not really spitting out stacks and figures. You're really just shouting your opinion at me, and that's okay. And I was like, hey, I'd rather you just say that you just don't like CrossFit and it's just not for you, rather than just saying trying to tell people that I'm doing it's going to basically put me in a hospital later on in my life. And it's like, no, it doesn't make sense to me. So, but it was just one of those things that at the end of the day, though, I mean, you're still my friend and it's fine, but and like I don't have to agree with what you're saying, but at the end of the day, I still want you to know that we still can be bros and hang out, and
Yeah.
even if it's not only what your version of fitness should look like, even if it's politically and or whatever your political affiliations are, religion affiliations are, just for me at the end of the day, are you a good person to me and people you interact with? And that's more of what means more to me. And it's like it's cool to have these different ideologies so that, like you said, we grow as people.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how people take liberties without permission? Where all of a sudden you talk about CrossFit and then you get a fire hose opened up on you about all of the potentially harmful and negative effects of that, particularly over a period of time, when you didn't ask for any of that. One of the things about being a Christian that I find off-putting about other Christians is when they get a question from someone who's genuinely curious about learning more. Maybe they're a non-believer for whatever the reason, and they ask a question, and that Christian opens the biblical fire hose on them.
Yes.
And what about this? What about whenever you get the question on any topic? What about answering the question to a point or in a way where it piques the curiosity of that person to want to ask the next question? And now what you're in is a dialogue rather than a monologue. And it's like pick a topic. It can be about anything.
Yeah.
Even interpersonally in a marriage. I actually just did this yesterday. And over 10 years, Chris, I've gotten way better at this. I was not good at this right from the start, but where I'm asking the questions and somewhat cliche, do you want me to listen or do you want my input?
Ah, yes.
And where historically I've just gone 0 to 60 with input that was never asked for.
Exactly.
I think that's just a better way of going about it in various settings, various conversations.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%, man. It's just like what I was saying, just kind of what I've learned is to slow down things and actually just listen to what people are saying, and then decide if I should talk or if, like you just said, or they just want to vent to me. They just want me to listen. They don't really care
Right.
what my opinion is. They just want to do that. And that's a lot of stuff is what, based on certain relationships I've had, just that, oh, you didn't really want me to try to help you fix this problem. You just wanted me to listen. And it's like, okay, like I screwed up a couple times. Okay, now I got it. Now I figured it out. And that's not with everybody. That's just generally speaking. But usually that's just maybe the whole point of this. What I wanted to say is to slow down a little bit and hopefully good things happen.
Yeah.
So, but I feel like that's a good way to take this podcast home right there. I want to be respectful of your time, Dr. Ed Slover. Thanks for being here. If you want to plug your podcast or your book or just anything you want to plug in general, people find you and all that good stuff, feel free to do that.
I appreciate that. I can be found really in two primary places. Quest Consulting Service, that's service singular. So questconsultingservice.com. thequestforlife.com. So that's quest, the number for life.com. Podcast is the same name, the Quest for Life podcast. So Spotify, Apple, wherever we find podcasts nowadays. And I'm also on LinkedIn as Dr. Ed Slover, or you can find me as at Quest Consulting Service on LinkedIn.
Well, any special messages you want to give out that you didn't get out during the podcast that you want to leave people with, or anything good like that?
I think one final thing.
Okay.
And that is whenever we make a conscious decision every day to be fractionally better than what we were yesterday, and then we make that decision again tomorrow, we just absolutely make the world in which we reside better. I don't think either one of us or anyone listening is going to change the entire world. But what we're able to do is we're able to change the world of the people we let into ours. And we do that by being fractionally better every day, by developing habits that add productive value and don't detract from our life. And we don't know how other people see us. We don't know how we come off to other people. And I like to believe that when we live out and through our values, people take notice and it inspires them to take new and different action.
That's the way to take a podcast home right there. So appreciate you being here. Good talking with you.
You too. Thanks so much, Chris.
See you, folks.